Most of your suffering, you're doing it to yourself. Researchers at Wake Forest School of Medicine put people in brain scanners and discovered something wild. Mindfulness meditation reduced pain by 44%, not by numbing you, but by changing how your brain interprets pain. They watched it happen in real time. Different brain regions lit up, different neural pathways activated. This validates a 2,500-year-old Buddhist teaching called the two arrows. Here's how it works. Life shoots you with the first arrow. You stub your toe, get criticized at work, receive bad news. That's unavoidable pain. But then you shoot yourself with a second arrow. The worry, the rumination, the catastrophizing, the self-blame. That second arrow, completely optional. The Buddha said when an untrained person gets hit with pain, they feel two pains, physical and mental. But a trained person only feels one. They don't add that second layer of suffering on top. And here's what makes the neuroscience so fascinating. Mindfulness doesn't work like a painkiller. It's not numbing the signal. The Wake Forest study showed it activates totally different brain regions than placebo, higher order cognitive areas that literally reframe your relationship to pain. Think about it. Someone leaves dirty dishes in the sink. First arrow, mildly annoying, but then your mind spirals. They always leave messes for me. They don't care about me. I'm unappreciated. Now you've gone from minor annoyance to full resentment. You shot yourself with the second arrow. So what happens when you learn to stop? Let me show you exactly what the research found. Let's break down what that second arrow actually looks like in real life. Say you're at home and you notice a stack of dirty dishes in the sink that someone left. That's mildly annoying, right? That's the first arrow. But then your mind takes over. You start thinking, they're always leaving a mess for me to clean up. How many times have I asked them to clean up after themselves? They clearly don't care about me at all. Why am I always unappreciated? Suddenly you've gone from a minor annoyance to full-blown resentment and feelings of being unloved. That's the second arrow, and you did that to yourself. Or think about getting sick. A friend recently shared a story about her whole family getting COVID. She noticed her own reaction was filled with resistance. It felt wrong and unfair. She was a runner. She shouldn't have been stuck with this virus. But her young sons, they played when they had energy and rested when they felt tired. They didn't enjoy being sick, but they didn't beat themselves up mentally with thoughts about what should or shouldn't have been. They were dealing with the first arrow, not shooting themselves with the second one. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers at Wake Forest School of Medicine decided to actually study this with brain imaging. They wanted to know if mindfulness meditation, which is basically training yourself to not shoot that second arrow, actually works differently in the brain than other pain relief methods. They took 75 healthy volunteers and split them into 4 groups. One group learned real mindfulness meditation. Another group got a placebo cream they were told would reduce pain. A third group learned fake meditation, basically just deep breathing without the mindfulness component. And the control group just listened to an audiobook. Each intervention lasted 4 days with 20-minute sessions. The mindfulness group was taught to focus on breath sensations while maintaining a non-evaluative cognitive state. They learned to acknowledge arising thoughts, feelings, and emotions without judgment and simply return attention back to the breath. The instructors emphasized that sensory and affective events are momentary and fleeting, not requiring further interpretation or evaluation. The placebo group had a cream applied that they were told was lidocaine, a topical anesthetic being tested for pain reduction. The researchers even wore white lab coats and blue medical gloves to enhance the effect. The sham meditation group was told they were practicing mindfulness, but were only instructed to take deep breaths without any of the actual mindfulness training about non-judgmental awareness. The results were pretty remarkable. All the cognitive interventions reduced pain compared to the control group, but mindfulness meditation blew the others away. It reduced pain intensity by 27% and pain unpleasantness by a massive 44%. The placebo cream only reduced pain intensity by 11% and unpleasantness by 13%. The fake meditation fell somewhere in between at 8% for intensity and 27% for unpleasantness. Meanwhile, the control group actually reported increased pain, up 14% for intensity and 18% for unpleasantness. likely due to sensitization from repeated exposure to the painful stimuli. But the really fascinating part was what was happening in the brain. The researchers used a special type of MRI called pseudo-continuous arterial spin labeling that measures cerebral blood flow to see which brain regions were active during pain. Mindfulness meditation activated completely different brain regions than placebo. During meditation, they saw increased activity in the orbitofrontal cortex, the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, and the anterior insula. These are higher-order brain regions involved in cognitive control and reappraising sensory experiences. Basically, the meditators were actively reframing their relationship to the pain. The placebo group, on the other hand, showed activation in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and actually showed decreased activity in sensory processing regions, like the secondary somatosensory cortex. That makes sense because placebo works through expectation and belief. You expect the cream to work, so your brain turns down the pain signal. But mindfulness works differently. It's not turning down the signal, it's changing how you relate to it. And here's something crucial. The fake meditation group, the ones who thought they were meditating but were really just doing deep breathing, their pain relief was entirely explained by one thing: lower respiration rate. They were basically just relaxing. But the real mindfulness meditation group showed no relationship between their breathing rate and pain relief. Their pain reduction was coming from those higher-order cognitive brain regions, not from relaxation. This distinction is important because it shows mindfulness isn't just a relaxation response. It's an active cognitive process. The Buddha described 3 specific mental reactions that turn that first arrow into a second one. First is resistance. When pain hits, the untrained person resists it, fights against it, wishes it wasn't happening. That resistance creates what he called resistance obsession, where you become fixated on getting rid of the pain. Second is seeking pleasure to escape. Because the person doesn't know any other way to deal with painful feelings, they try to distract themselves with sensual pleasure, which creates its own problems. And third is ignorance about the nature of feelings. Not understanding that feelings arise and pass away naturally, that they're temporary and don't require our interpretation or judgment. The trained person, the one who practices mindfulness, does something different. They sense the feeling but remain disjoined from it. They don't add the emotional reactivity, the story, the catastrophizing. They simply observe that pain is present, acknowledge it without judgment, and let it be what it is. No second arrow. The Buddha emphasized that a well-instructed disciple of the noble ones discerns the origination, passing away, allure, drawback, and escape from feelings. This awareness prevents those obsessive patterns from taking hold. Modern psychology has picked up on this in a big way. Therapists now teach clients to notice the first arrow, to allow themselves to feel the initial pain or frustration or disappointment. Then they teach awareness of the emotional reaction, that impulse to yell, complain, turn anger inward, or spiral into thoughts of not being good enough. That's the second arrow. The goal isn't to deny the initial reaction, but to have a choice in how to proceed. You can free up energy for circumstances you actually can control instead of spinning out on ones you can't. The neuroscience backs this up beautifully. In the Wake Forest study, when people practiced genuine mindfulness meditation, their pain relief was associated with activation in the right anterior insula, which is involved in fine-tuning sensory evaluations in a context-dependent way. The subgenual anterior cingulate cortex activation suggests they were able to shift attention between the breath and the pain stimulus without getting stuck. And the orbitofrontal cortex activation points to unique reappraisal processes, actually changing the contextual evaluation of the painful experience. What's remarkable is that mindfulness meditation actually deactivated the thalamus and periaqueductal gray matter, brain regions that facilitate low-level sensory and pain processing. It's like the meditation was working at multiple levels, both turning down the volume on pain signals and changing the interpretation of those signals that do get through. These are the same brain regions that normally light up when you experience physical pain, and meditation was essentially quieting them down. The researchers noted something important. Mindfulness meditation produced much greater reductions in pain, unpleasantness relative to pain intensity compared to placebo. The percent difference between intensity and unpleasantness. Reduction was 27% for meditation, but only 3% for placebo. This suggests meditation is particularly effective at addressing the suffering part, the emotional and evaluative aspects of pain, rather than just the raw sensation. That's the second arrow. You're not necessarily making the physical sensation go away completely, but you're removing the layers of suffering you've been adding on top. The practical takeaway here is pretty powerful. We deal with second arrows constantly throughout our day. Someone cuts us off in traffic, that's the first arrow. Then we spend the next 20 minutes fuming about what a jerk they are, how nobody knows how to drive anymore, how the world is going downhill. Second arrow. We make a mistake at work, first arrow. Then we spiral into thoughts about how we're incompetent, how we're going to get fired, how we'll never be successful. Second arrow after second arrow after second arrow. The good news is you can train yourself to stop. The Wake Forest study showed that just 4 days of 20-minute mindfulness sessions was enough to produce significant pain relief and distinct brain changes. The mindfulness group's scores on the Freiburg Mindfulness Inventory increased by 16%, showing measurable improvement in their mindfulness skills. You don't need years of practice. You need to learn the basic skill of noticing when pain arises, acknowledging it without resistance, and letting it be what it is without adding layers of interpretation, judgment, and emotional reactivity. Start by simply noticing your arrows. When you're in emotional pain, allow yourself to feel it. Notice frustration, irritation, physical discomfort. Then become aware of your reaction. That impulse to complain, to blame yourself, to catastrophize, that's the second arrow. Just catching yourself in that moment, recognizing that you're about to pile suffering on top of pain, that's the first step. Over time, you develop the ability to let that second arrow drop before you shoot yourself with it. Life is going to keep shooting first arrows. That's unavoidable. People will disappoint us, our bodies will hurt, things won't go as planned. But we have complete control over whether we shoot ourselves with that second arrow. And that makes all the difference between pain, which is inevitable, and suffering, which is optional.